Hey folks, Nathan B. Butler here, and this is our second of these content overview videos for Star Trek Star Realms. And this time, what's interesting is that this isn't just a reskin of stuff we've seen before. Some of it is, but you may recall that when we looked at the core box for Star Trek Star Realms, it was just a straight-up reskin of the original Star Realms set that started it all. This instead has some reskinned elements, particularly relating to two packs that were available for Star Realms, but then everything else is not only new material, it's a new way to play that Star Realms simply doesn't have. So join me here as we take a look at the Star Trek Star Realms Borg Invasion expansion, which, as an expansion, does require the base game to play. So package-wise here, we have Star Trek Star Realms Borg Invasion expansion, Wise Wizard Games, who came up with Star Realms originally, and then UVS Games. We just have the game name and expansion name there. Game and expansion, the two companies, Borg symbol there. 2 to 4 players, although that is not actually true of this set. This actually has a solo variant, so this could actually be 1 to 4. 14 plus, 20 minutes. Again, just going around the sides there. And let's see what the back tells us about this expansion. Again, 2 to 4 players, although it actually does play solo also. 14 plus, 20 minutes. Borg Invasion. Resistance is futile. Star Trek Star Realms Borg Invasion pits players against the menacing foe, the Borg, in 2 new exciting multiplayer game modes, Cooperative and Player versus Player. Players will work together to overcome the Borg Collective, or a single player will assume the role of the Borg and assimilate all resistance. The Borg utilize new and devastating technology to assimilate other ships, powerful force fields making them impervious to attacks, and legions of drones to infiltrate and overpower enemy ships. This expansion to Star Trek Star Realms adds a new tool to aid in your battles, Gambits, which are powerful ability cards that provide strategic advantages at key moments to change the course of battle. Contents: 3 Borg chip cards, 78 game cards, 1 Borg game mat, and full-color rulebook. A copy of Star Trek Star Realms is required to play with this expansion, and then all your legalese and UPC and all that good stuff. Let's look inside. So, of course, we start out with our rulebook. And basically, it's not super well laid out, but it does tell you a bit about how to set everything up. Gambits get their own little small area, but yes, you have different game modes using these Borg components. And as I mentioned before, it's not just cooperative, it's cooperative and solo. That's not just me saying cooperative, but played like multi-handed or something. No, it flat out says solo in the rulebook, which is why it's odd it doesn't mention that on the box, in the indicator about number of players, or in the description, but it is soloable. Now, from your Star Trek Star Realms core box, you have your base rules, and you are going to use all the components from it, so don't put those away. The expansion adds on top of it without removing anything. Make sure you are familiar with those rules, and make sure you break out your board. This, of course, is that board. It's cardstock. It's not wonderful, but it's serviceable. There are actually a couple of official playmats available now, but I personally am waiting to see if they do one for the Borg Invasion, because using a regular playmat with what we're going to see here for the Borg doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. In any event, when you're playing with the Borg, you're going to lay this out, just kind of scoot it down, at least in my case, to show you what's going on, and there's another board here of equal size that you're going to place to play with the Borg. And you'll notice here on that Borg board, you've got Force Field, Collective, and Hive Integration in this upper area. Then you have this area with the outlines for large cards, about the size of one of those solo cooperative challenge cards that we see in Star Realms. To put a card here, but also have it move as it goes. We'll see why momentarily. You'd have some logos over here for Paramount, UVS, Star Trek, Wise Wizard Games, and you do over here have some copyright stuff. But notice that underneath there's these little green little hexes. Those are directly above spaces in the trade row. That's important. We'll see why in a moment. So I've gone ahead and put out the trade deck and laid out a trade row along with the Decora class always available cards over here. Now if I'm going to play cooperative or solo, that basically means that the Borg is automated over here. So you've got these cards called drone cards. They all say the exact same thing down here, which we'll talk about when we talk about how it actually works here. There are 30 of these cards, 5 each that are identical of these 6 just different art variants. So we have that one, that one, that one, that one, and that one. No creative names, they're all just Borg drones, and they all do exactly the same thing. Again, I do appreciate the fact that they do give us numbers down in the corner to make sure that we have all of our cards, though. You have the Borg symbol up here, and then the 1 indicating essentially its health. Again, it's called authority when you're talking about the entire side, so authority, health, whatever, it's what's going to take out a drone. So when you're playing solo or cooperative, you've got your 80 card trade deck. You're going to lay out 5, and then after laying out 5, you're going to take these 30 cards, and you're going to shuffle them in with the remaining 75. So you have 105 cards in that deck, and between about a quarter and a third are going to be ones that are bad for you. As to what you're fighting against, there's going to be a Borg ship up here that's going to be moving around. Again, the size of a challenge card, basically, from Star Realms. From the standpoint of card anatomy here, any of these big Borg ship cards are going to have an authority value up here, effectively their health, a hand size, which is not used in solo or cooperative, but is used for the PvP 1 versus many mode where one player is the Borg, has the name of the actual ship, as we've seen before, right? So there's kind of like a generic name, a card type, but then you've got your specific name here, a little bit of flavor text and whatnot, a dot we'll see the usefulness of here in a moment, a Borg symbol up here, and the back of each one is a help card, a reference card for the solo cooperative mode. And it's either going to be the Borg sphere with 25 authority, drawing 4 cards. Notice it's got the faction symbol up there as well. A sphere 634. That's for 1 to 2 players. A Borg cube classic, 50 authority, drawing 5 cards as opposed to 25 and 4. That's Locutus's cube. This is for 3 players. And for 4 players, a Borg Tactical Cube, Tactical Cube 138, with 75 authority / health, drawing 6. Now you got 5 cards here called Force Field cards. They're going to be used with this area up here. You have one that is basically a new symbol indicating just a neutral, unaligned ship, like, say, the Decora class, the Federation, the Dominion, the Romulans, and the Klingons. So these are actually supposed to be, according to the rulebook, different on either side, like a color and a faded out one, but they're all just color on both sides, probably because what they're asking you to do is not to flip them over to determine if they're active or not, but instead to either put them in this area up here called force field or simply have them completely off the board. So having them be 2 different colors on either side really doesn't matter. Not sure if that's a misprint with the cards or a misprint in the rulebook, but either way it's inconsistent, but it doesn't matter. You also have what are called Hive Integration cards, one for each of the named factions. We'll look at these in a moment. Suffice to say, there's a different side for cooperative and solo versus PvP. You just kind of sit those off to the side, and they're going to wind up in this Hive Integration area. Now, the goal here is that you're trying to take out the Borg, either solo or collectively, before they take out all of the players. The players have 50 authority each to start with, so essentially 50 health. The sphere has 25. Again, the regular cube has the 50. The tactical cube has the 75. But that's just one value you're all going up against. However, this game, this mode, does have player elimination. If a player gets knocked down to 0 authority, that's it. They're out of the game. They can choose 1 card from either their hand, deck, or discard pile and put it into the discard pile of any other player, and then that's it. They're done. So each round, the Borg gets to go first. There's a first step that doesn't mean anything on the first turn, which refers to filling the collective. We'll talk about that in just a moment as we kind of loop back around. So the first thing that's going to happen is the Borg ship is going to move. It's going to look for the most expensive card in the trade row. So in this case, it's this one here, Taiga Core Station. In that case, it doesn't move. But let's say Taiga Core was instead over here. It will move 1 space that direction following the outlines. On the other hand, if there were 2 that were tied for the most expensive, it would move to the closest one. And if those were equidistant, the players would get to choose which direction it moves, but always just the 1 space. And I apologize for the glare. The font used for this game really is not very conducive to iPad cameras. Now, the Borg assimilate. They're going to assimilate whatever card they are directly above, even if it's not the one they were targeting, right? They targeted the station over here and tried to move towards it, but only moved 1 space and needed 2 to get to it. That's fine. It still goes after what's directly below, hence the little marker on the card that lines up with the marker here. that lines up with the spot on the trade row. So in this case, the bird of prey gets assimilated and it goes up to the Borg ship. Then, of course, the row refills. Note that it is only moving to the ship, though. It's not moving to the collective yet. When that happens, you're going to pull out the Hive Integration card for the faction that was just assimilated and do whatever it says. And the abilities differ. So for Klingons, the Borg assimilates a ship with the highest cost from any discard pile. Or the Borg gain authority equal to the cost of the assimilated card. That's for the Federation. Or for the Romulans, the player with the highest authority immediately takes damage equal to the cost of the assimilated card. Or for the Dominion, all players choose and discard cards from their hand based on the cost of the assimilated card. 1 to 3, discard 1 card. 4 to 6, discard 2. 7 plus, discard 3. Okay. Whenever that happens, though, it only happens once per Borg turn, so it's going to come out there. The next step is that the Borg ship attacks. However, its attack value is equal to the number of cards sitting in the collective. So right now there aren't any, so let's skip this and explain it again instead in a moment. This brings us to another way that the Borg can assimilate. As cards are leaving the trade row, new cards come out. But again, 30 out of those 105 that are sitting in that deck over there, those are going to be drones. So let's say a drone comes out. The drone is going to be put in front of a targeted player. The question is, who is targeted? Well, if it's a particular player's turn, then that player is the targeted player. But if it's the Borg's turn, they're going to look at which player has the most remaining authority, so the most health left, and that's the targeted player. If there's a tie, the players decide. Then you count the number of drones in front of that player. Just like the number of cards up here in the collective, 1 each are going to total up the attack power. The number of drones is going to give, essentially, its assimilating ability, so that then, however many drones there are there, 1 for each gives you a total value. You're going to then search your discard for a card of that value, and the Borg assimilate it, and again, it goes on the ship. And those drones are going to go into the scrapyard, basically out of the game. So let's say there were 2 drones, then maybe this card that has a cost of 2 is the one that's assimilated and goes on the ship. Maybe they've got 3 drones there, but the only card in your discard is one that's 2. Well, it can still afford the 2, so the 2 still gets assimilated. The 2 drones that paid for it still go to scrap, but that 1 drone that's left is still sitting there waiting for a future turn. And again, just like when the Borg assimilated from the trade row, assimilation triggers the Hive Integration card to come out for that faction again. So let's say the assimilated card was a Federation vessel here. It is now on the ship as well. Out comes a Hive Integration card. It triggers, and this stays out here. So basically, as drones come out of the trade deck, they pile up in front of a vulnerable player and eventually assimilate cards out of their discard. Okay, so let's circle back and assume that the players have taken their turns, and now we're back to the Borg player's turn, so we can see the stuff that we couldn't see if it was their first turn. So now there are some ships sitting here. So a couple things happen at the beginning of the turn. First off, even before step 1, where these assimilated ships join the collective, any Hive Integration cards that are already out from the previous turn, they get removed. Then, step 1, any assimilated cards sitting on the ship get moved to the collective up here. You're probably about to fan them out, because it doesn't really matter what type they are as long as they're just visible to count how many there are. Then again, the Borg ship moves 1 space towards the most expensive, which in this case is our 7 here. Then it's going to assimilate the card, put it on the ship, as we saw a moment ago. We're going to have to refill the trade row. Uh-oh, it's a drone. Set the drone aside, finish refilling the row, then put the drone wherever it's supposed to go. Well, in this case, it's the Borg's turn, so you're looking for the player with the highest authority left. It goes to them. You count up the number of drones there, see if there's a card of that value in their discard pile to assimilate. If not, keep dropping the cost down until you eventually get to one that you can, or they just stay there. If they do assimilate, discard enough to pay for the cost of the assimilation and stick the ship on there, as we just saw. But let's assume the discard pile perhaps was empty at this point, just so we don't have to deal with that in this example phase. Now it's time for the Borg attack step. It's going to have a combat value equal to the number of cards in the collective. So in this case, 2. Yes, there's 1 assimilated. It's not in the collective yet. Doesn't count. So at this point, it's 2. and it's going to attack every player for that value. It's not spreading it out amongst the players. Player 1 gets hit for 2, player 2 gets hit for 2, and so on. If you have yourself an outpost in play, that red value is how much they need to spend in combat to take out the outpost, and you cannot be attacked, nor can any of your other locations until there are no outposts in play. So the first thing a Borg is going to try to do is take out an outpost if they can. If they can't, like in this case, that's a value of 6, and they've only got 2 attack, well, the Borg attack just ends. They're going to start with the one with the highest defense value and work their way down. Either way, though, as long as you still have any outposts remaining, they can't attack you, the turn just ends. Though bear in mind, this is player by player, so your outposts do nothing to protect anybody else. If they've got combat left after taking out the outposts, or if there were no outposts in the first place, they move to the next decision step, which is to look and see if they have enough combat value to actually eliminate the player. If they do, they fire off, the player is eliminated, they're out of the game. But again, they can take one card that they have and give it to the discard of another player. If they can't take out a player outright, they will instead aim for locations. Again, the ones with that sort of silvery gray symbol there. Again, they'll start with the one with the highest defense and work their way down. But unlike with an outpost, if they can't destroy any locations, the locations don't stop them from then saying, okay, fine, and turning towards you. So if there's combat left after taking out the locations, or if they just couldn't take out any locations, then any remaining combat hits you as the player. It takes down your authority. It's a pretty easy process to follow. It's just outposts, take you out or not, locations, you. But what about you as the player? What can you do to fight the Borg? Well, your turns pretty much work the same way, right? You're playing cards from your hand, you're gaining trade, you're acquiring cards, you're gaining combat. It's a question of just how are you using your combat here? Because obviously you're not going after other players, and the Borg are a little more complex than a standard player. You can simply directly attack the Borg ship, try to knock down its authority, just like you would attacking another player directly. On the other hand, remember, you may have drones that's sitting in your play area that as they build up are going to be siphoning off cards from your deck by assimilating things out of your discard. You can spend 1 point of combat to take out 1 drone in your area, again, hence why it has that 1 authority in the corner. So you can take them out before they siphon things from you. The other thing that you can do with your combat, though, is essentially to save assimilated cards. You can't target the collective. They're already part of the Borg. There's nothing you can do for them. But cards that are in the process of being assimilated, that are sitting there on the Borg ship, can be saved. You can spend combat, not trade, combat, equal to the cost of a card sitting on the Borg ship to save them from assimilation. And in doing so, you take the card, so you pay 7 combat to rip the station free of the Borg, and it goes in your discard. It joins your deck. So now not only can you spend trade to get cards to put in your deck from the trade row or the Decora class, you can also spend combat to acquire cards if they've been assimilated by the Borg sphere. But again, that may be a little tough because the Borg sphere is moving towards the most expensive as much as it can. So you may find yourself not able to afford a combat cost to actually save the card, and it winds up in the collective. It's a strategic decision. But remember, this is the Borg. Resistance is futile. They adapt. Well, at the end of your turn, if you dealt any damage, any combat usage that actually did some damage to drones, or the ship, or an assimilated ship, the Borg learn from that, at least temporarily. And they manage to create a defense against that type of attack. So you're going to, at the end of your turn, determine which card dealt the most damage, if there were multiple cards, to the Borg, regardless of where it was aiming. And whatever faction that card is, you're going to break out a force field card. Let's say it was the Romulans. It goes into force field, and while this is in play, cards of that faction that would generate combat do not generate any at all. 0. So let's say, for the sake of argument, maybe somebody's acquired all these cards in the trade row, and just the ones that are out here as the example trade row, those are what he's playing on his turn. Well, the Galler class could deliver damage. The Miranda couldn't because it just doesn't have damage on it, no combat value. But then all of these Romulan ships, regardless of the fact that they build combat, and it's a lot of combat, it's 5, plus the triggered ability of 2, so that's 7. Plus 5 is 12, plus another 2 is 14. plus another 2 is 16. There's 16 combat worth of damage to be dealt here by the Romulans. It would mean nothing, because a Romulan-resistant force field here is in play. None of those 3 cards would be dealing any combat whatsoever. Now, it doesn't fully negate the card, right? The D7 Stormbird class is still going to get that 3 trade, but none of the combat is going to process at all. Eventually, when it has more than 3, in other words, 4 or 5, though typically it'll be 4, they get discarded. Note that this happens at the end of a player's turn. So let's say they were resistant already to Starfleet, neutral, and Klingon damage. You go into your turn, you can't do any damage with neutral cards like the Decora class, with Klingons, or with the Federation. But you managed to deal damage with a Dominion card. That was the one that dealt the most damage on the turn. So at the end of your turn, this goes here. Ding ding, now they're at more than 3. These clear. So you're not playing with 4 factions being blocked, but you could have up to 3 being blocked, which is a lot in a game that only has 4 main factions and relatively few cards that are going to be unaligned. It's really just the Decora class and your starter cards. Lastly, 2 quick things to note for the solo and cooperative mode, and that is that if you were to make the Borg discard a card, obviously they have no deck, you just get to move the Borg ship 1 space in a direction. And if there are ties and the Borg need to select something, and there's a tie for the selection, the active player gets to choose if it's their turn, and if it's the Borg's turn, then the group decides. And that is the solo cooperative mode for Star Trek Star Realms via the Borg Invasion expansion. But that's just one of 3 big things to talk about for this new expansion. So let's move on to the PvP mode, a 1 versus many mode using the Borg. Now in this mode, you're going to set up the trade row as normal. Decora class heroes are always available, 5 cards out. Shuffle the remaining 75 cards into your deck, but you're not shuffling in the drones. Instead, the drones are going to be in the hands of a Borg player. They're like a resource for that player. You're still going to use a Borg ship, only in this case, you're counting up the number of non-Borg players. So if the number of non-Borg players is 1, then it's a sphere, 2, it's the cube, 3, it's a tactical cube, which still means the same number of players, right? Originally it was 1 or 2, use the sphere. Well, now it's 2, 1 player, 1 Borg. The cube was for 3 players. Well, now it's 2 players, 1 Borg. Still 3 humans playing the game. And then the tactical cube was 4+, now it's 3+, because again, you're not counting the Borg. But whatever, same deal. The regular players will still have 50 authority again. The Borg player will have however much authority is listed on their ship, which scales based on the number of opponents. And this is their hand size, 4, 5, or 6. This mode plays with Gambits, and there are 2 Gambits that are unique to the Borg. We'll look at Gambits in a little bit, because that'll be the last thing to look at from this set, and we're going to be comparing it to what was in the original Star Realms product line. But there are 2 Gambits here, Temporal Vortex and Borg Nanoprobes, that'll be placed out for the Borg player. I'm going to put them off screen up there. They're going to take the force field cards to be used as needed. They're going to take the Hive Integration cards, but they're going to flip it over to the PvP side and hang onto those as well. And then the Borg player gets a special deck that is not used at all in the cooperative or solo mode. New faction cards with this symbol up in the corner. It's got the Borg symbol, but that symbol up in the corner indicates that it's that player deck. They're all referred to as Borg Tactics. They have 4 copies of Regeneration Alcove, which gives them 1 trade or 1 combat. 3 of Transporters, which lets them put a drone into any player's area. They have 2 copies of Interplexing Beacon, which lets them get 1 trade and to choose a faction, and that card has that faction symbol for that turn. 2 copies also of Cutting Beam that gives them 3 combat, and they may spend X combat to assimilate a card of X trade cost. And then 1 copy of Tractor Beam, trade of 2, and they have a scrap ability. You may spend X trade to assimilate a card of cost X. So they get to shuffle their special Borg deck and draw cards for their hand to the hand size listed on the ship. Again, the Borg player goes first, then it's going to go around the table. At the beginning of the turn, as before, if there are any Hive Integration cards that are in play, they get removed. If there are any assimilated ships that are sitting there on the Borg ship, they're going to join the collective. But in this case, that doesn't mean they go up here to add 1 to the attack value overall. Instead, it just means they go into the Borg player's deck. It's a way of them acquiring cards. But then, rather than the drones being drawn from the trade deck and triggering as the trade row is being refilled, instead, as the next step after taking care of assimilation and getting rid of any Hive Integration cards, the Borg player just takes a drone, if they choose, but why wouldn't they? They just take a drone and stick it in the player area of any player they choose. And anytime they do that, anytime they put a drone into a player area for whatever reason, they're allowed to trigger an assimilate action, which essentially works the same way for the most part as it did before. You count up the number of drones that are there, and they can assimilate a card from that player's discard by putting it on the ship by discarding a number of drones equal to that cost. Any that aren't spent just stay. The biggest difference is that when they pay that cost by removing the drones, they don't go to the scrap pile, they instead go back to the supply for the Borg player. It's not possible for the Borg player to run out of drones. Otherwise, they can generate and spend trade to acquire cards to their discard. They can generate combat to do direct attacks, just like a regular player can. If by chance the players ever try to make the Borg player discard a card, they could just discard, or they could instead move the Borg ship by 1 space, just like what happens automatically in solo and co-op. And that matters not because it's going to assimilate whatever it's over. That's not a thing in this mode. Instead, whatever trade row card is lined up with the Borg ship costs 1 extra trade to acquire. Then once the Borg player is done with everything they want to do and they're going to their draw phase at the end of the turn, then at the beginning of the draw phase, they can manually move the ship themselves by 1 space to increase the cost of a targeted card. Hive Integration works the same way that it did before. They get that immediate benefit as soon as they assimilate a card of a particular faction. In this case, Hive Integration for the Dominion. Gosh, it just does not get any better, does it? It tries, and it just does not get better. So Hive Integration for the PvP version of the Dominion, target opponent discards a card. For Romulans, draw a card. For Starfleet, gain 4 authority. And then for Klingons, you may scrap a card in your hand or discard pile. Force fields work the same way they do in solo and co-op. If either the Borg player, via the authority on their ship, or an assimilated card, or a drone in a player area takes damage, you figure out which card dealt the most combat damage that turn. Whatever faction it is, the Borg player does indeed get a force field for that faction, and yes, as before, at the end of a player's turn, if there are more than 3, they all get discarded. That has not changed. The only other thing of note is that, yes, the Borg player does have those Gambits up here that they can make use of. We'll talk more about Gambits in a moment, but Temporal Vortex lets them once per turn pay, you can barely see it there, it's 5 trade to gain 5 combat and choose a player to discard a card. That is always active. Then you have Borg Nanoprobes. It's a once per game kind of thing because you have to scrap it. Reveal any player's hand. This turn, if an effect would allow you to assimilate a card from that player's discard pile, you may assimilate it from their hand instead. So maybe you're playing Cutting Beam to spend combat to assimilate a card of cost X based on the amount of combat you spent. Well, normally you could only do that from their discard pile. Now you can do it from their hand. But just the one time. Otherwise, assimilate is always from the discard pile, regardless of mode. For what it's worth, there are some variants listed here. You could vary the difficulty by playing against different Borg ships, or by increasing the limit to the number of active force fields allowed, or by adjusting the amount of Gambits drawn by players at the start of the game. You'll notice, by the way, they were not mentioned at all in setup for either of these Borg modes. They're not in the setup rules for either one. So I guess base, you would have none, but the Borg player would have 2 if you're playing PvP, and then you could add some. And now that we've seen those 2 oddball Gambits, we're done looking at the one versus many version of the Borg Invasion expansion. Now it's time to check out Gambits, and this is where comparison to the original Star Realms will come into play. So in the regular Star Realms game, we first had the Gambit set, It had 13 Gambits, but it also had solo and co-op versions of Nemesis Beast, Pirates of the Dark Star, the solo and co-op challenges in like a regular card size, and 3 copies of the unaligned Merc Cruiser, but the other cards in it were all Gambits. The Borg Invasion expansion provides you with 25 regular Gambits. There are those 2 that are just for the Borg player, but 25 that can be used in any game. And the rules for the Borg Invasion for Star Trek Star Realms is that you're going to deal 2 of them to each player at the start of the game. Originally with Star Realms, the rule basically was that you would deal out however many to each player at the start of the game. Either everybody gets the same amount, or you could use the number that they get as sort of a handicapping method. In fact, that was such a unique mechanism in this early Star Realms set, which, by the way, for Gambits, for whatever reason, in its first printing at least, still has a P as in promo in the little symbol in the corner instead of it actually being a G for Gambit, which is what it is, for example, in the app. But it actually said at the bottom, when playing with Gambit cards, choose a number of them to be dealt face down to each player. You may reveal any Gambits at the start of the game or during your main phase. That is still the same here, only with Star Trek Star Realms, it's 2 period to start with. And interestingly, the glare isn't nearly as bad on these cards as they are on the Star Trek Star Realms cards. Just different finish, I guess. But in any event, you can use these Gambits in the Borg Invasion co-op and solo, or the 1 versus many, or you could use them within the base game. It doesn't actually say to use them, except for the Borg ones, in the 1 versus many mode, so they're just kind of an optional part of any Star Trek Star Realms game, as they are for any Star Realms game. But here we see that Precision Strike, the new Gambit for Star Trek Star Realms, is just Unlikely Alliance reskinned from the Gambit set for Star Realms. Ambush is Surprise Assault, Salvage Yard is Smuggling Run, and Maximum Warp is Salvage Operation. Same card effects, just obviously different art, and in this case, a different orientation. Then, still from the original Gambit set, we have 2 copies of Peace Treaty, which is the equivalent of the 1 copy we get of Rise to Power for Star Realms. Then, Political Maneuver has the same name here, Political Maneuver. Aggressive Culture is Frontier Fleet from Star Realms, and Planetary Shield is Energy Shield, with 2 copies each of the latter ones here. And then rounding out the original Gambits set, we have Planetary Assault, that's the equivalent of Star Realms' Bold Raid, and then 2 copies of the Picard Maneuver, which are the equivalent of the 1 copy we get of Wild Gambit. The original Star Realms also had the Cosmic Gambit set. That one, for what it's worth, had a little rule card, instead of having to put it on all the cards themselves. And it did have the Secret Outpost unaligned base that comes into play with one of the Gambits. So we have some equivalents from the Cosmic Gambit set. We have Warp Core Ejection, which is effectively the same as Acceptable Losses, 2 copies of Particle Fountain, matching 2 copies of Asteroid Mining, 2 of New Life, New Civilizations, and 2 of Exploration. Those are the equivalents there. And then for the 2 copies of Timely Reinforcements, those are a repeat of the Rapid Deployment card pair from Cosmic Gambits. Then you have 3 others that are effectively the same. We have Saucer Separation, which is the equivalent of 2-pronged attack. Maquis Alliance, the equivalent of Veteran Pilots. And of course, when I say these are reskins or equivalent, there is some terminology that changes, but it's equivalent from game to game. So for example, Maquis Alliance refers to Raiders, Veteran Pilots refers to Vipers, but those are effectively the same card reskinned across the games. We then have Refit, that is effectively Triumphant Return. And then this one is kind of equivalent. You have Quark's Contraband and Black Market. So Quark's Contraband is that you're going to play with the top card of the trade deck face up, and the owner of that Gambit can acquire that card for 1 less than its cost. So they have 1 extra option that's only for them at 1 less than its cost. Black Market says, at least in the printing that I have here, to add an additional space to the trade row above Black Market. And once per turn, the player who revealed Black Market can acquire a card from that space for 1 less than its trade cost, but otherwise it functions as a normal trade row for all players. So mostly the same, but the card that's available thanks to the Gambit is actually purchasable by all players with Black Market, just with a discount for the player who revealed the Gambit, whereas with Quark's Contraband, only that player has access to it. So close, but not exactly a reskin. Then lastly, two other things to make note of. You may recall that I mentioned that for the ones reskinned from the original Gambit set, you had 2 copies of the Picard maneuver, but only 1 copy of Wild Gambit. You do get a second copy of Wild Gambit in the Cosmic Gambits set. It has that new layout for Cosmic Gambits where it actually says Gambit at the top and everything if you got the earlier printings of them, but it is effectively the same thing. So there is an equivalent for that other Picard maneuver. It's just in Cosmic Gambits, but Hidden Base does not have an equivalent in Star Trek Star Realms. Nor do any of the Gambits that are included with the command decks, for example, that came later. They're really just drawing from Gambits and Cosmic Gambits here. The Borg ones are also not equivalent to any specific other Gambit. I would assume that the reason that Hidden Base isn't among the ones for Star Trek Star Realms is because this one not only can be scrapped for 4 authority, but it's also the one that puts that secret outpost card into play, and I guess I probably didn't want to make things messy with adding kind of a weird outpost into the mix for Star Trek Star Realms. So there you have it, folks, a detailed content overview and gameplay overview look at the new expansion for Star Trek Star Realms, Borg Invasion. Again, you're not getting any new trade deck cards whatsoever with this, but you are getting Gambits that can be used in any game mode, and you're getting 2 entirely new game modes to fight against the Borg. A 1 versus many boss mode, kind of like a Dragon or the Lich in Hero Realms, and a co-op solo mode that's a bit more elaborate than what we see within Star Realms. We'll continue to look at more Star Trek Star Realms as more products are released. Thanks for watching, and live long and prosper, even if resistance is futile. I promise, it's usually not.